Now that you've gotten an intro into characteristics and trade-offs in software, let's shift gears a bit and go over the two main architectural styles in software called monoliths and microservices. A monolith is the traditional software architecture that's been used since the beginning of computer science. Older software companies likely still have lots of their software still written as monoliths. Microservices is a recent advent of technology in maybe the past decade, and it became increasingly popular ever since Amazon and Netflix adopted it. So let's dive a little deeper into these two architectural styles. In a monolith, all of the code that makes up the front-end and the back-end functionalities exists on one server. The code might be split up into different code bases, but all of the code bases eventually get deployed onto a single server. This is the opposite of a microservices architecture. In a microservices architecture, we take a product and split it up into many applications that are each hosted on their own servers. A monolith is an example of a centralized system. Since all functionality lives on one server, all client-side API calls hit the same application. This is the opposite of a microservices architecture, which is an example of a distributed system. APIs are hosted on different servers, so different API calls will live on different microservices. The end user won't be able to tell the difference between a monolith or a microservices, but development teams are able to see the difference in architecture. And lastly, in a monolith, the centralized application communicates with one large database that holds all of the data for all functionality of the system. Versus in a microservices architecture, each microservice owns their own database that holds data for a specific functionality. So let's visualize what we just went over. Here, in a monolithic architectural style, we see all of the front-end and back-end capabilities exist on one server that connects with a single large database. In a microservices architecture, this large application is split into smaller parts called microservices, all living on their own server. These microservices host their own APIs, complete with their own business logic and data access layers. The UI also lives on its own server. Each microservice then connects to their own database. The user will come onto the UI, make an API call living on one of these microservices, which can also connect to another API living on another microservice.